Bob Proctor sat across from a struggling entrepreneur who had just asked him the question he'd heard 1,000 times before. What's the secret? What do millionaires know that I don't? The answer Bob gave that day wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't about working harder, networking better, or finding the perfect business opportunity. It was about something so simple, yet so profound, that it would change everything this person thought they knew about wealth creation. Throughout his decades of studying success and working with some of the wealthiest individuals on the planet, Bob discovered something remarkable. There was one habit, one consistent pattern of behavior that separated those who achieved extraordinary wealth from those who remained stuck in financial mediocrity. This habit wasn't taught in business schools. It wasn't discussed in financial planning seminars. And most people who possessed it couldn't even articulate what they were doing differently. The millionaires Bob studied didn't just think differently about money. They had developed a specific mental habit that shaped every decision they made, every opportunity they pursued, and every challenge they faced. This habit was so ingrained in their daily lives that it became automatic, unconscious, almost like breathing. And the fascinating part, anyone could develop it, regardless of their current financial situation, education level, or background. What Bob discovered would challenge everything society teaches about wealth creation. It would expose why so many intelligent, hardworking people struggle financially while others seem to effortlessly attract abundance. This wasn't about positive thinking or visualization alone, though those played a role. This was about a fundamental shift in how the mind processes information about money, opportunity, and possibility. The hidden habit Bob uncovered wasn't just creating millionaires. It was creating a completely different experience of life itself. Those who mastered it didn't just accumulate wealth. They transformed their entire relationship with success, failure, risk, and reward. And today, Bob Proctor's teachings reveal exactly what this habit is and how anyone can cultivate it in their own life. Bob Proctor spent over 50 years studying the science of success and the psychology of wealth creation. He worked directly with Earl Nightingale, studied Napoleon Hill's principles, and mentored thousands of individuals on their journey to financial freedom. Through all of this experience, he identified patterns that consistently appeared in the lives of wealthy individuals. But one pattern stood out above all others. This pattern wasn't immediately obvious. It wasn't something millionaires talked about at dinner parties or discussed in interviews. In fact, most wealthy people Bob studied weren't even consciously aware they were doing it. It was so deeply embedded in their way of thinking that it had become second nature, like a reflex that triggered automatically in response to certain situations. Bob realized that this habit was the foundation upon which all other success principles were built. Without it, visualization didn't work, goal setting fell flat, action plans fizzled out. But with this habit firmly in place, everything else seemed to fall into alignment. Opportunities appeared. Resources materialized. The right people showed up at the right time. What made this discovery so powerful was its simplicity. Bob wasn't revealing some complex financial strategy or sophisticated investment technique. He was pointing to something far more fundamental, something that operated at the level of consciousness itself. This was about how successful people had trained their minds to automatically respond to the world around them. The challenge Bob faced in teaching this concept was that it contradicted much of what people had been conditioned to believe about wealth. Society had programmed most individuals with limiting beliefs about money, success, and their own worthiness to receive abundance. Breaking through this conditioning required more than just intellectual understanding. It required a complete rewiring of subconscious patterns. Bob Proctor believed that every person was born with the same potential for greatness. The difference between those who achieved extraordinary wealth and those who didn't wasn't talent, intelligence, or luck. It was this one habit, this single pattern of thinking that either opened the floodgates to abundance or kept them firmly shut. Understanding this habit and learning to cultivate it wasn't just about making money. It was about unlocking human potential at its highest level. And Bob dedicated his life to helping others discover and develop this transformative way of thinking. Bob Proctor taught that the hidden habit of millionaires begins with what he called a paradigm of abundance. This wasn't just positive thinking or optimism. It was a fundamental operating system in the mind that automatically interpreted reality through the lens of possibility rather than limitation. Millionaires had developed this paradigm so thoroughly that it influenced every thought, decision, and action. they took. Most people operate from a paradigm of scarcity without even realizing it. They see limited opportunities, limited resources, and limited possibilities. When they look at a business opportunity, their mind automatically searches for reasons why it won't work. When they consider investing, their thoughts immediately jump to what they might lose. This scarcity paradigm acts like a filter, screening out possibilities and highlighting dangers. Bob observed that millionaires had somehow flipped this script entirely. Their minds had been trained to automatically look for opportunity in every situation. Where others saw problems, they saw possibilities. Where others saw risk, they saw potential reward. This wasn't naive optimism or reckless thinking. It was a sophisticated mental habit that allowed them to perceive opportunities that others completely missed. The paradigm of abundance operated at a subconscious level, which made it incredibly powerful. Wealthy individuals didn't have to consciously remind themselves to think abundantly. It happened automatically, like a reflex. Their minds had been programmed through repetition and reinforcement to default to abundance thinking in every situation. Bob explained that this paradigm affected everything from small daily decisions to major life choices. A person with an abundance paradigm sees a for sale sign and automatically thinks about investment potential. They hear about an industry disruption and immediately consider how to capitalize on it. They meet new people and naturally think about collaboration and mutual benefit. Conversely, someone operating from a scarcity paradigm sees that same for sale sign and thinks about how expensive real estate is. They hear about industry disruption and worry about job security. They meet new people and wonder what those people want from them. The external circumstances are identical, but the internal interpretation creates completely different realities. Bob discovered that this paradigm wasn't fixed or permanent. It was learned, which meant it could be unlearned and replaced. Every person had been programmed with their current paradigm through years of conditioning from parents, teachers, media, and society. But that programming could be overwritten with new programming that served them better. The key to developing an abundance paradigm was consistent, deliberate exposure to abundance-based thinking. Bob taught that the subconscious mind learns through repetition. Just as a child learns language by hearing it repeatedly, adults can reprogram their paradigm by repeatedly exposing themselves to abundance concepts. This required more than just reading a few books or attending a seminar. It required daily, consistent practice. Bob recommended spending time each day consciously directing thoughts toward abundance, possibility, and opportunity. Over time, these conscious thoughts would become unconscious habits, eventually forming a new paradigm. The paradigm of abundance was the foundation of the millionaire habit. Without it, all other techniques and strategies would be filtered through a lens of limitation. With it, even simple actions could lead to extraordinary results because the mind was perceiving and responding to a completely different reality, one rich with opportunity and possibility. Bob Proctor noticed something fascinating about millionaires. They seemed to spot opportunities that were invisible to everyone else. It wasn't that these opportunities didn't exist for other people. They were there, available to anyone, but only those with the millionaire habit had trained their minds to automatically recognize them. This automatic opportunity recognition was the second component of the hidden habit. The human brain receives millions of bits of information every second, but conscious awareness can only process a tiny fraction of this data. The subconscious mind acts as a filter, determining what information reaches conscious awareness and what gets ignored. Bob realized that millionaires had programmed their filters differently than most people. For the average person, the subconscious filter was set to notice problems, dangers, and things that confirm their existing beliefs about limitation. For millionaires, the filter was set to notice opportunities, possibilities, and evidence of abundance. This meant they were literally experiencing a different reality than those around them. Not because circumstances were different, but because their perception was different. Bob taught that this automatic recognition system could be deliberately programmed. He compared it to buying a new car and suddenly noticing that same model everywhere on the road. The cars were always there, but the brain wasn't paying attention to them until they became relevant. Millionaires had made opportunity relevant to their subconscious minds. The programming process involved clearly defining what opportunities looked like. Many people had vague desires for wealth, but no specific understanding of what they were actually looking for. Bob emphasized the importance of clarity. What specific types of opportunities aligned with their skills, interests, and goals? The more specific the programming, the more effective the recognition system became. Once the mind knew what to look for, it became incredibly efficient at finding it. Bob shared stories of clients who, after properly programming their opportunity recognition system, started noticing potential business ideas everywhere. They'd be watching television and spot a gap in the market. They'd be having a conversation and hear about an emerging trend. They'd be reading a newspaper and identify an underserved demographic. This automatic recognition extended beyond just business opportunities. Millionaires also automatically recognized opportunities for learning, for valuable connections, for strategic partnerships, and for personal growth. Their minds were constantly scanning their environment and flagging anything that could potentially move them toward their goals. Bob emphasized that this wasn't about being opportunistic in a negative sense. It wasn't about taking advantage of people or situations. It was about being alert to possibilities for creating value, solving problems, and generating mutual benefit. True millionaires understood that wealth came from serving others, and their opportunity recognition was calibrated to find ways to provide value. The habit required practice to develop. Bob recommended a daily exercise where individuals would consciously look for opportunities throughout their day. At first, this had to be done deliberately and consciously. But over time, with consistent practice, the behavior became automatic. The conscious effort trained the subconscious filter. Automatic opportunity recognition transformed how millionaires moved through the world. They weren't more intelligent or more talented than others. They had simply trained their minds to notice what was always there. And this habit of consistently spotting opportunities created a compounding effect, where each recognized opportunity led to more opportunities, creating an upward spiral of success and abundance. Bob Proctor identified another critical component of the millionaire habit: the ability to make decisions quickly and confidently. He noticed that wealthy individuals had developed what he called a decision-making reflex. When faced with an opportunity or challenge, they didn't deliberate endlessly. They gathered essential information and made a decision. This wasn't recklessness. It was a trained habit of decisive action. Most people struggled with decision-making, especially when it came to money and opportunity. They overthought, overanalyzed, and ultimately paralyzed themselves with indecision. By the time they finally decided to act, the opportunity had usually passed. Bob taught that indecision was actually a decision to do nothing, and doing nothing rarely created wealth. The decision-making reflex of millionaires operated from a fundamentally different place than the decision-making process of most people. Average individuals made decisions primarily to avoid loss or minimize risk. Millionaires made decisions primarily to maximize gain and opportunity. This subtle difference in orientation created dramatically different outcomes. Bob explained that the fear of making the wrong decision kept most people stuck in analysis paralysis. They wanted absolute certainty before taking action. But millionaires understood something crucial. Absolute certainty doesn't exist in the real world. They had trained themselves to be comfortable with calculated uncertainty. They knew that not all decisions would work out perfectly, and they were okay with that. The millionaire's decision-making reflex was built on a foundation of trust in themselves and their ability to handle whatever outcomes arose. If a decision led to success, great. If it led to a learning experience, that was valuable too. They had reframed failure not as something to be avoided at all costs, but as feedback and education. This reframing removed much of the fear that paralyzed others. Bob taught that this reflex could be developed through practice, starting with small, low-stakes decisions. Many people struggled with major financial decisions because they hadn't developed the decision-making muscle with smaller choices. By practicing quick, confident decision-making in everyday situations, individuals could train the habit that would serve them in bigger moments. Another aspect of the millionaire's decision-making reflex was the willingness to make decisions before having all possible information. They understood the concept of diminishing returns on information gathering. The first 20% of research might give you 80% of what you need to know. The pursuit of the remaining 20% of information could take forever and delay action indefinitely. Bob observed that millionaires set internal deadlines for decisions. When faced with an opportunity, They would give themselves a specific time frame, a day, maybe a week, depending on the magnitude of the decision, and then they would decide. The deadline created urgency and prevented the endless deliberation that plagued less successful individuals. The decision-making reflex also included the ability to reverse decisions when necessary. Millionaires weren't so attached to being right that they couldn't change course when new information emerged. They made decisions quickly, but held them loosely, always willing to adjust based on results and feedback. This flexibility prevented them from riding bad decisions into the ground out of ego or stubbornness. Bob taught that developing this decision-making reflex was essential for wealth creation, because opportunities have expiration dates. The ability to recognize an opportunity meant nothing if indecision caused it to slip away. The millionaire habit integrated opportunity recognition with decisive action, creating a powerful combination that consistently moved them forward while others remained stuck in contemplation and analysis. Bob Proctor discovered that millionaires shared another consistent habit that most people overlooked. They continuously invested in themselves. This wasn't occasional or sporadic. It was systematic, ongoing, and prioritized. They understood that they were their own greatest asset. And like any asset, they required maintenance, upgrading, and development. The investment took many forms, but it always reflected a core belief that personal growth directly translated to financial growth. Millionaires spend money on books, courses, seminars, coaching, and mentorship without hesitation. While others saw these expenses as costs, millionaires saw them as investments with compounding returns. Bob taught that this habit reflected a fundamental understanding of how wealth is actually created. Wealth isn't created by working harder at the same level of consciousness. It's created by elevating consciousness, expanding awareness, and developing new capabilities. The person you are today created your current financial situation. To create a different financial situation, you must become a different person. The continuous investment in self went beyond just formal education or training. Millionaires invested in their physical health, understanding that energy and vitality were crucial for sustained success. They invested in their mental health, often working with therapists or coaches to clear psychological blocks. They invested in their relationships, recognizing that their network directly impacted their net worth. Bob observed that millionaires approached this investment strategically. They identified specific areas where growth would create leverage in their lives and businesses. Rather than random self-improvement, they focused on developing skills and knowledge that would directly contribute to their goals. This strategic approach maximized the return on their investment. One of the most powerful aspects of this habit was that millionaires invested in themselves especially when money was tight. Bob emphasized this point repeatedly. Most people waited until they had extra money before investing in personal development. Millionaires understood that investing in themselves was how they created extra money. They prioritized it, even if it meant sacrificing other expenses. The compound effect of continuous self-investment was staggering. Each book read, each course completed, each skill developed, added to the previous ones, creating an ever-expanding foundation of knowledge, capability, and confidence. Over years and decades, this compound growth created an enormous gap between those who consistently invested in themselves and those who didn't. Bob also noted that millionaires invested time in themselves, not just money. They protected time for reading, for reflection, for learning, for strategic thinking. They understood that their time was their most valuable resource, and they allocated portions of it to their own development rather than filling every moment with busy work or entertainment. This habit created a positive feedback loop. As they invested in themselves, they became more capable. As they became more capable, they created more value. As they created more value, they generated more income. As they generated more income, they had more resources to invest in themselves. The cycle continued upward, creating accelerating growth. Bob taught that anyone could adopt this habit immediately, regardless of their current financial situation. Even small investments in self-development, done consistently, would compound over time. The key was making it a non-negotiable priority rather than something done occasionally or when convenient. Millionaires treated self-investment as seriously as they treated paying their mortgage or feeding their family, because they understood it was foundational to everything else they wanted to achieve. Bob Proctor identified a distinctive mental habit that separated millionaires from others. They automatically thought in terms of multiples, and leverage. When presented with an idea, opportunity, or resource, their minds immediately went to, how can this be multiplied? How can I create leverage? This was such an ingrained pattern that it happened unconsciously. Most people thought linearly. They calculated their potential income based on trading time for money. If they made $50 per hour, they could work 40 hours and make $2,000. The math was simple and limiting. Millionaires had trained their minds to reject this linear thinking. They didn't ask, how much can I make per hour? They asked, how can I make money while I sleep? Bob taught that leverage came in many forms: financial leverage, time leverage, system leverage, and people leverage. Millionaires habitually looked for ways to create leverage in everything they did. Rather than doing tasks themselves, they asked how those tasks could be systematized or delegated. Rather than serving one client at a time, they explored how to serve many clients simultaneously. This thinking in multiples extended to problem solving as well. When faced with a challenge, millionaires didn't just look for a solution to that one problem. They looked for a solution that could solve that problem for many people, turning the solution itself into a business opportunity. This habit of multiplying value creation was central to their wealth accumulation. Bob observed that millionaires habitually asked different questions than most people. Where others asked, can I afford this? Millionaires asked, how can I afford this? The first question accepted limitation. The second question sought possibility. This subtle shift in questioning revealed the underlying habit of thinking in terms of creative solutions and leverage, rather than accepting constraints. The leverage mindset also applied to learning and knowledge. When millionaires learned something valuable, they immediately thought about how to teach it to others, how to scale it, how to apply it in multiple contexts. They extracted maximum value from every piece of knowledge by finding multiple applications and creating systems around successful principles. Bob emphasized that thinking in multiples required breaking free from the employee mindset that most people were conditioned into. Employees thought about doing a job and getting paid for it. Millionaires thought about creating assets that generated returns repeatedly. They focused on creating intellectual property, systems, businesses, and investments that worked for them rather than them working for money. This habit of seeking leverage explained why millionaires were drawn to certain activities and repelled by others. They gravitated toward opportunities with exponential potential rather than linear potential. They invested time in activities that could scale rather than activities that required constant personal involvement. Their automatic mental filtering system flagged scalable opportunities and dismissed non-scalable ones. Bob taught that developing this habit required consciously practicing the mental exercise of how can this be multiplied. Throughout the day, when performing any task, ask how it could be systematized. When solving any problem, ask how the solution could be packaged. When creating any value, ask how that value could reach more people. These conscious questions, repeated consistently, eventually became unconscious habits. The power of thinking in multiples and leverage was that it allowed millionaires to create exponential rather than linear growth. While someone thinking linearly might double their income with twice the effort, someone thinking in multiples might create a system that doubled their income with no additional effort, then doubled it again and again. This habit was one of the primary reasons why wealth gaps expanded so dramatically. Those who thought in leverage created compound growth, while those who thought linearly created arithmetic growth. Bob Proctor recognized that millionaires had developed a specific habit around relationships that differed dramatically from how most people approached connections. This wasn't networking in the traditional sense. It was strategic relationship building based on genuine value exchange and long-term thinking. Millionaires automatically thought about relationships as partnerships where all parties benefited and grew together. The habit began with how millionaires viewed other people. Rather than seeing people as competition or comparing themselves to others, they automatically looked for how they could collaborate. Their minds were programmed to think, how can we work together, rather than how do I compete with them. This collaborative mindset opened doors that remained closed to those trapped in competitive thinking. Bob taught that millionaires were strategic about where they invested their relationship energy. They understood that relationships required time and attention, and those resources were limited. Rather than trying to maintain surface-level connections with hundreds of people, they focused on developing deep, meaningful relationships with key individuals who aligned with their values and goals. The millionaires' approach to relationship building was characterized by a give-first mentality. They habitually looked for ways to provide value to others before asking for anything in return. This wasn't manipulation or strategy in a calculating sense. It came from an abundance mindset that understood giving created circulation, and circulation created flow. What you give comes back multiplied. Bob observed that millionaires had trained themselves to be genuinely interested in other people's success. When they met someone, their automatic questions were about the other person's goals, challenges, and aspirations. This genuine interest made them magnetic. People naturally wanted to be around them, help them, and collaborate with them because they felt seen, valued, and supported. The strategic element came in how millionaires cultivated relationships with people who were ahead of them on the path to success. They sought mentors, advisors, and peers who operated at higher levels of achievement. Rather than being intimidated by more successful people, they were attracted to them, understanding that proximity to excellence elevated their own standards and capabilities. Bob taught that millionaires also had a habit of maintaining relationships over time. They didn't just network when they needed something. They stayed in touch, checked in regularly, and continued to provide value even when there was no immediate benefit to themselves. This long-term relationship cultivation created a network of trusted connections that became invaluable over years and decades. Another aspect of this habit was the willingness to end relationships that no longer served mutual growth. Millionaires understood that not all relationships were meant to last forever. They could recognize when a relationship had become toxic, draining, or misaligned, and they had the courage to create distance or end the connection, always with respect, but with clear boundaries. The habit extended to how millionaires leveraged their relationships. When opportunities arose, they automatically thought about who in their network might benefit from or contribute to that opportunity. They connected people, created partnerships, and facilitated collaborations. This positioning as a connector and facilitator amplified their value and strengthened their entire network. Bob emphasized that this strategic relationship building wasn't about using people or being transactional. It was about recognizing that business and wealth creation were fundamentally social endeavors. The quality of your relationships directly impacted the quality of your opportunities, resources, and results. Millionaires had simply developed a habit of approaching relationships with intention, generosity, and strategic awareness, creating a network that supported their growth while they supported others. Bob Proctor taught that all these individual habits integrated into one master habit that truly separated millionaires from everyone else. They had trained themselves to think from the end. This meant living mentally and emotionally as if their desired outcome had already occurred. This wasn't wishful thinking or pretending. It was a sophisticated mental discipline that aligned their unconscious mind with their conscious goals. Thinking from the end was the habit that Bob considered most fundamental because it integrated everything else. When someone truly thought from the end result, their paradigm automatically shifted to abundance. Their opportunity recognition activated because they were looking for confirmation of their end state. Their decision-making became decisive because they were choosing an alignment with their already achieved future. Bob explained that most people thought toward their goals. They looked at where they were and projected forward toward where they wanted to be. This created a constant awareness of the gap between current reality and desired reality, which often generated feelings of lack, limitation, and discouragement. Millionaires had flipped this entirely. They started from the end point and looked backward. When thinking from the end, a millionaire didn't wake up and think, I want to be wealthy. They woke up and thought from a place of already being wealthy. This subtle shift changed everything. Their questions changed from how do I get there to what would I do now? Already being that person. This created completely different decisions and actions. Bob taught that this habit required consistent practice because it went against every conditioning most people had received. Society trained people to accept their current circumstances as reality and to see goals as distant futures. Thinking from the end required rejecting current circumstances as the ultimate reality and accepting the desired future as reality now, with current circumstances being temporary conditions. The neuroscience behind this habit was fascinating. The subconscious mind couldn't distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and an actual experience. When someone repeatedly thought from the end, feeling the emotions and living the mental experience of their achieved goal. Their subconscious mind accepted that as reality. It then worked to align external circumstances with that internal reality. Bob emphasized that thinking from the end had to include emotional alignment. It wasn't enough to intellectually imagine success. Millionaires had trained themselves to feel the emotions of their achieved goals regularly. They cultivated feelings of gratitude, abundance, confidence, and joy as if the desired outcome had already manifested. These emotions sent powerful signals to the subconscious mind. This habit also created what Bob called cognitive dissonance. In reverse. Normally, cognitive dissonance caused discomfort when actions didn't align with beliefs. When someone thought from the end consistently, any action that didn't align with that end state created discomfort, automatically motivating them toward aligned action. Their behavior naturally shifted to match their end state thinking. The integration of thinking from the end with all the other millionaire habits created a powerful system. The paradigm of abundance supported thinking from the end. Thinking from the end enhanced opportunity recognition. Opportunity recognition led to decisive action. Decisive action was multiplied through leverage. Leverage was enhanced through strategic relationships. And all of it was fueled by continuous self-investment. Bob Proctor believed that if someone could master just this one habit, truly thinking from the end, all the other habits would naturally develop from it. It was the keystone habit that held everything else together. When someone lived mentally and emotionally as if they had already achieved their goals, they automatically behaved like someone who had achieved those goals. And when they consistently behaved like a millionaire, they inevitably created the results that millionaires created. This was the hidden habit that created millionaires. The complete integration of their mental, emotional, and behavioral patterns around thinking from their desired end state rather than their current circumstances. Bob Proctor's discovery of the hidden habit that creates millionaires wasn't just an observation about wealthy people. It was a revelation about human potential and the power of the mind to shape reality. Throughout his decades of teaching, Bob emphasized that this habit wasn't reserved for a special few. It wasn't dependent on intelligence, education, connections, or even starting capital. It was available to anyone willing to do the mental work required to develop it. The paradigm of abundance, automatic opportunity recognition, decisive action, continuous self-investment, leverage thinking, strategic relationships, and thinking from the end. These weren't innate traits that some people were born with. They were learned habits that anyone could cultivate through consistent practice and dedication. Bob always reminded his students that knowing about the habit and practicing the habit were two entirely different things. Many people would hear these concepts, understand them intellectually, maybe even get excited about them, and then return to their old patterns of thinking within days or weeks. The true transformation came not from understanding the millionaire habit, but from practicing it daily until it became as automatic as breathing. This required commitment, patience, and faith in the process, especially in the beginning when old patterns pushed back and external results hadn't yet shifted. Bob taught that the seed had to be planted and nurtured consistently before the harvest could be expected. The most powerful part of Bob Proctor's teaching on this hidden habit was his unwavering belief that it would work for anyone who truly applied it. He had seen it work in his own life, transforming him from a man who was broke and working as a firefighter to someone who built multiple successful businesses and helped millions worldwide. He had witnessed it work in the lives of countless students from every background imaginable. The hidden habit that creates millionaires wasn't hidden because it was secret. It was hidden because most people never looked deeply enough at how successful people actually thought. Bob spent his life revealing what was always there, waiting to be discovered and applied by anyone ready to transform their relationship with wealth and success.